This program is brought to you as a public service by Maui Causes. Maui Causes is a crowd-funded media production group that provides media production services to a variety of environmental and progressive causes here in Maui County. Visit us on the web at www.mauicauses.org. Welcome to another edition of Maui Causes. Hi, I'm Sam Small. Eternal thanks to Todd Swan and Sleepy John and the entire facility here at Akaku that affords us the opportunity to bring issues and ideas to you and your family that you're not likely to hear in other places. We are here to be a positive disruption. That is a necessary ingredient in a free democracy in terms of the local politics, but it's also relevant to just the way that our predominant culture works, the general flow of things, or as they may say today, the internet of everything. Because that taps into, a cultural mindset. And that cultural mindset is affected, there's this notion that the combination of language, thought, and behavior are three things that form the way that every one of us makes our choices on a daily basis and how we run our lives. And of course, how we run our lives and the choices that we make on a daily basis accumulate. We leave a wake behind us. And our society, has become, in a lot of ways, we hear that it's a disposable society. And that has evolved for a number of different reasons. A lot of them external. A lot of them business-oriented, because we are, as a culture, manipulated by the business forces around us. The market economy affects us. It affects all aspects of things here on Maui. Certainly, we talk about that a lot here on this show. Going back to the takeover 125 or so years ago, where the predominant culture was subverted in favor of business interests. And we live under that cloud of business interests here in Maui County. But as a culture, our Western society, our American culture also lives under a cloud. We're deficient in a couple of ways. And one of those things has to do with death. We leave that wake behind us, and it's an interesting, word, because what's missing in our society is an intimate connection to our own mortality. That creates an opportunity for this consumer culture to be enforced on us easily. That notion that there are 7 generations that need to be considered in every aspect of what a person does has vanished from our society. We have become a disposable society. So anything that brings awareness and an understanding to this actual function of death that's been sanitized from our lives, from elderly, you don't see elderly people on television. The culture has been washed of those very important aspects. As a culture, as a society, we've lost connection to our ancestors. And because of that, we really don't have a connection to the future either. Our children, even our children's benefits. If people have enough money, they just throw money at their kids. And actually, in a lot of cases, ruin their lives because they give them too much free money, too much liquidity. They don't have to learn the lessons that really deepen a psychological maturity in a person. Those are very important lessons. And we're going to get into how these aspects affect us globally, but also locally here in Maui County, because Maui County is the benefit of the work of several people, pioneers sort of in this area. Ram Dass lives here on Maui and runs programs and workshops and established a rich heritage of hospice care, some of the earliest hospice trainings. He helped facilitate. Joan Roshi Halifax is another teacher that for decades has been writing the books. They've been writing the textbooks on this stuff. And locally, we have the benefit of my good friend, I'm happy to call, Bodhi B. Bodhi, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
And tell us some about Doorway into Light and the Death Store. Those are the two local initiatives that Bodhi's responsible for.
Well, first, thank you. And listening to what you introduced this with, so powerful, Sam. That was so powerful. And what you referred to, cultural sleepwalking, kind of a hypnotic half-lived life that almost everyone lives in now, not even recognizing.
Right.
And one of the threads that wove me into the work I'm doing was the recognition that a close encounter with death was the most immediate thing that seemed to shake people out of that cultural hypnosis. More powerful than any spiritual practice I've engaged in. That
right.
We can read about thousands of people dying every day, and most of us have become pretty jaded to it and immune.
You see so much of it on television.
Some of it is self-protection itself, but in that self-protection we become desensitized until we hear that one person close to us has either received a diagnosis or suddenly died.
Right.
And something seems to touch everyone I've seen have that experience, and that's what I call a near-death experience. That's my version of it. Excuse me. So that was one of the threads that brought me into this work in terms of the madness that's playing out in the world and how to see if it can be shifted in our lifetime.
Well, thank you for being an anchor in the community to bring these issues. We've collaborated for years now and have been able to, as a media producer, I've been able to generate media content from the workshops and seminars that you have staged here on Maui. And we've been able to, bring these teachings and understandings, global. We have sales of the Dying into Love project that you and I collaborated with Ram Dass and Joan Halifax and others.
I just met some folks in New York who have been studying that series. That thread, and as a hospice volunteer for a number of years, I started to see how people were dying, and that was a big learning experience. Most of us don't get to see how people are dying.
Right.
Most of us have not seen a dead body. The fact that was taken out of the village, out of village life, not just taken, but given away as we moved to cities.
Yeah.
We weren't caring for the dead. We didn't have a room for them, and we certainly didn't have a backyard to bury them in. And that's when the church burial ground happened, and then the business burial ground happened, which is the model that's playing out right now. And I'll come back to that model because it's a very poor use of land. But we started Doorway into Light, and I wanted to bring more spiritual, emotional, educational, logistical support to the pieces that weren't being addressed either by the medical establishments or the churches. So then Ram Dass and I have teamed up organizing events really since 2006. In 2012, we started Hawaii's only nonprofit funeral home, only certified green funeral home. Then I opened up.
And that's Doorway into Light.
Doorway into Light.
And people can find that.
You can find Doorway into Light. We're a green nonprofit funeral home, mostly doing direct burials, and now having done ocean burials, really since 2012.
And I want to touch on ocean burials later and the work that you had to do in the state and the county to be able to do an ocean burial legally. We'll talk about that later.
And again, we're talking about burying the body in the ocean, the full body. So then we opened up the death store because I started making caskets. I make these beautiful pine box caskets and sell them for a third of what the particle board caskets at the funeral homes are charging. And I don't use toxic glues or no metal. The amount of metal and glue and concrete and plastic and embalming fluids that have gone into cemeteries is horrendous.
Sure.
In fact, there's an article in the New York Times today about all the garbage in buried in the land. And that's an important topic.
It is.
I just saw The Story of Stuff. Remember that video? And every kid in every school ought to watch The Story of Stuff to see the linear thing. So then I started making caskets. I became a funeral director in Hawaii, and I was doing counseling and opened up the death store.
Which is where?
Which is on West Kuiaha Road in Haiku. We're open every Saturday and by appointment. And
what services are available through the death store?
The death store is we call it a community educational resource center and store. So along with ecologically sane caskets and beautiful urns, a lot of them locally crafted urns. There's a bookstore, there's a lending library, there's a reference library, there's free counseling and education and support. We have a booklet we've come out with. Everything, pretty much everything you'd need to know in case you might die one day or in case you're dead one day. Very, very factual, legal forms, information you'd want to know about before your family had to find you dead or something like that.
And those aspects are very important on a very personal family level.
Very much so.
Because if you don't have your advanced directive, if you haven't gone the distance to talk to your family about what your last wishes are, and actually, write up some of these, simple documents that can memorialize and legalize your desires, then your entire situation is tremendously vulnerable, because you could be driving down, the Hana Highway, and, some tourist is on their cell phone and plows right into you, and bam, you would be dead. What would your family do if that happened? What would happen to your loved ones? What would happen to your estate? Or, for instance, if you took sick and suddenly were, diagnosed with a rapid form of cancer, and you only had, 6 months. How is your care? Would you want to be hooked up to tubes and, have aggressive things done to your body? Or would you rather, pass peacefully? If you don't have that in writing, then your entire life is vulnerable to the commercial forces that will extract as much money out of you before you're dead. And then they will let you die. That's what happens in hospitals. It's what happens in the system. The system is designed to extract wealth out of your pocket.
But coming back to the...
Please.
I'm teaching at the college right now over here on Maui, and I'll offer it again in March. And we're going through all of the logistical pieces as well as the psychological piece in terms of, is there any value in preparing for death? And certainly in terms of how, if you, I ask people, how many people know they're going to die and they don't know when? Everybody raises their hand and looks at me like, what are you, stupid? Everybody knows that. But the fact of the matter is, it looks to me like hardly anybody knows that. A lot of people know that in their head, right. But whether they live that truth, I mean, we're going to die and we don't know when could be the most known thing there is for us humans.
And the most ignored.
The most known and the least known or talked about or educated about. Right. So then I say, look around you. How many people do you see living like that's true? Because you can look around and you go, clearly these people that are doing what they're doing are not aware of the fact that they're going to die and they don't know when. They'd be doing something different.
Well, that's I've heard
And
you
if
ask.
their kids were going to die, and we don't know when, and their
Right.
parents are going to die, and and if you know you're going to die and you don't know when, it changes your life.
Yes.
It changes your life, and it breaks you out of this cultural hypnosis that, yes, business would like us to continue to be good shoppers. And death really breaks into it too, because usually an awareness of death usually doesn't make you want to shop more. I think what I see is it makes you want to shop less and use your time loving your family and being in your community and all the things that are very important to you. What is really important to you? It's not stuff. You know it's not. Everybody knows that by now. And yet we're caught in this, thing, and we're all part of it. And I cry, I grieve about the story of the world that's playing out right now. So then too, we have such a denial, avoidance, aversion about death. We're screwed up, I think. We don't live fully.
Right.
400 people on the average die every day in an accident. Mm-hmm. And that's just another factoid that people go, oh, that's interesting. 400 people go to bed tonight and they don't know tomorrow they're going to be dead in an accident. They were doing everything right, blah, blah, and then tomorrow they die in an accident. Right. And tomorrow night the same thing and the same thing, 400 people every day. And when we hear that, we go, that's an interesting piece of information, but that's not about us.
Doesn't connect to me.
It's about other people.
Right.
So then I say, I have bad news for you. I've spoken with other people. They don't think it's them either. So that's the avoidance, aversion, denial, and we're acting out of that. And our president must have studied this stuff really well, because the stuff that he says triggers this death response, and we are a death culture. I mean, nobody's talking about
how so?
Here's this big thing. We love Saudi Arabia because they're going to buy $100 billion worth of guns, right? I haven't heard anybody talking about, wait a minute. We have a country that's a friend of ours because they buy more weapons, more things that kill people,
right?
And we sell more than anyone in the world,
right?
And we compete with Russia and China to sell the most things that kill people in the world,
right?
And on and on and on. And so we are a death culture, and so it goes into the shadow.
In the Star Wars context, we are the Empire.
And in Avatar, we are the Empire. On and on, we are the Empire. And fortunately, the Empire is ending, is dying. I don't know if we'll live to see it, but it is dying because it's killing the world.
Right.
So then we come back to the death thing, and I see that we need deeper understanding of death in order to show up for people who are dying in a full way. Because it's not just the body's dying, and it's not just a medical and psychological event. It's a very deep and powerful and spiritual event. And that's when you really go deep into what's true, and what did I do with my life, and how many regrets do I have, and how much anger and resentment and unforgiveness do I have behind me, which is the work we're supposed to be doing today, not when we're on our deathbed. And so then, how to deeply care for people who are dying, and how to use the fact that we're going to die one day to become more kind and present and caring and socially conscious and active people, engaged people. Right. We don't have a lot of time.
You ask people, I hear, when they think they start to die. And what kind of responses do you get?
Well, the most common response is when you're born, and I used to think that myself, and I don't think that anymore. In fact, I think it does a disservice to dying people to say, well, we're all dying, what's the big deal?
Right.
Yeah, you're dying, but so is everybody. And I'll say where that came from, or at least where I think it came from. There are Buddhist teachings that say all sentient beings are dying. We're all dying from birth on. You'd never go up to a brand new mother and say, that's a beautiful baby. Too bad it already started to die. One, you wouldn't say it, and two, it's not true. But also we have this Western notion that we're a machine. In terms of how the medical establishment relates to us, we're a machine. And when the liver's broken, put in a new liver. And when the heart's broken, put in a new heart. And it's all piecemeal. It's like oil change and lube, kind of, fix the carburetor. And that's not who we are. But the view of us as a machine, of course, would mean once we drive out of the lot, we're going down.
We're
wearing out. We're dying.
Using it up.
And it's just not, but I didn't know that was true. I was under that Buddhist teaching, we're all dying, until I started sitting with people.
That's aging. There's a difference between aging and what we would classify as actively dying.
We could spend a whole hour at least just on the aging elder part, because you touched on it a little bit. But I'll come back to this. So people who are actively dying.
Actively dying.
Well, what does actively dying mean? And those people were doing something I'm not doing, clearly.
Like?
Well, that's a very good question. Like what? And I ask people to think about it. What exactly are actively people doing in their deathbed where maybe they're going to die today or this week
Or
that you're
even,
not doing?
or even 6 months.
Or 6 months.
Even some people have there are many people that go through a dying process that could last a year or more.
Oh no, people are dying for years now. When the
Medicine keeps them on the edge.
Well, not only that, but the intensive care unit, which was established in the 50s, I think, was mainly for accidents,
Right.
And heart attacks.
Right. Catastrophic
Now
event.
people are dying from cancer and heart disease and diabetes and Alzheimer's and dementia, all of which are diseases that can kill you over years. So you're not being suddenly killed by, so it's that not because of the medical system, that's another story. Yes, the medical system is now prolonging people, I would say oftentimes long past when they ought to be dead.
Right. That would
And
be
that's
like the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and some
No, that's
of those.
a lot of people that that are in Maui Memorial Hospital that want their family to stay alive no matter what, and keep trying the next experiment,
Right.
and keep trying the next radiation treatment and the new experimental drug. That's because everybody wants to. Most everybody I run into wants to be alive,
They want
and
to
most
prolong
every
life.
family member wants that person to be alive. So we're pushing that medical thing as much as it's becoming the nightmare, or has become many cases nightmare scenarios. But we're pushing that technology because we're afraid to die. And in fact, the dying part, I find that people are at least as afraid of the dying part than the dead part. The dead part is okay, it's the big unknown, and depending on how you relate to that, you're either comfortable with it, or you're looking forward to it, or you're afraid of it. But the dying part, most everybody is terrified of this dying part.
Of the process of dying.
Of engaging in their dying rather than backing into their dying, or I'm not dying, I'm not dying, I'm not dying, or I'm going to live as normal a life as possible while I'm dying, blah, de, blah, instead of recognizing dying itself as a time in life to actively engage in, I'm coming to the end of this particular chapter, rather than I'm going to keep going because we're all dying. And that is a huge disservice when somebody says, oh, we're all dying. It basically devalues what dying asks of us in terms of completing our life and coming to clarity and good feeling about our lives. And most of the suffering I see when people are dying is around the life they did and didn't live.
Right.
So.
And a lot of this comes to play not necessarily in our own dying. A lot of this comes to play in the deaths of our elders, our parents. My experience of both of my parents, transitions, becoming ill or just aging into it. Their bodies just eventually wore out. But there became a broad period of time with my mom. It was a 4-year process. We moved her here to Maui, and 2 of those years living in our own home, where we were the primary caregivers to her through her dying process, was tremendously intimate. It was wonderful to be able to experience that with her. Bittersweet, in all of those benchmark moments as her physical body deteriorated and her capabilities and her ability to handle any aspect of her own life began to be less and less and less. We were able to witness, a transition and a change in her, and that was fascinating to watch, and a real blessing to be able to have knowledge and experience of any of this stuff through the work that you do and others do.
That's beautifully said, because we're in a culture again that is grow, 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 expand, 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 progress, progress, up, and so we don't value the decline.
Right.
And because we don't value the decline, we get into, you hear, incompetence. Incompetence itself speaks to what we value in our culture. What do we value? We value competence in the skills that improve business. Mm-hmm. And what we find incompetent are when old people, because they're not fast, they're not sharp,
right.
they have other things in terms of their insight, their experience, the wisdom.
Connecting the dots.
You don't become an elder just by becoming old.
Right.
And that's a whole other conversation, because we've been quite short on elders. We're an elderless culture for the most part. We're a youth-driven culture, and it's killing the world. But it lines up with this right to die thing, which we can come back to, because if we don't see any value in old people or the decline, and we sure don't see any value in the dying piece. Like when I asked that same group of people, what's your perfect death? Most people will say, in my sleep. Mm-hmm. Which is skipping the dying part.
Right.
That's going from being alive to being dead. We want to skip the dying part. Other people say, no, I wouldn't want to die that way. I want to have time to say goodbye, to complete my life, to come to terms with myself and my community. So people, but for the most part, die in my sleep, which again isn't dying. Right? You could be killed by cancer, but that's not the same as dying is an active verb. You die.
It's a process.
Right? You go swimming, you die. It's the same thing, right? And you either engage in it, or you avoid it and be in denial of the fact that it's happening, or you live blah-de-blah, as normal a life as possible. So I'm out there teaching and educating. I lead a great training in April that people now from around the world are coming to. We're up to the 3rd annual. I teach people the spiritual, emotional, psychological, and logistical care of dying people. Mm-hmm. So nurses and doctors and chaplains and social workers and lay people that just want to know what to do when mom starts
Family
dying.
members, yeah, sure. There's more to our show in just a moment. This program is brought to you as a public service by Maui Causes. Maui Causes is a crowd-funded media production group that provides media production services to a variety of environmental and progressive causes here in Maui County. Visit us on the web at www.mauicauses.org.
I just came back from New York City. I was invited to be a featured speaker at a end-of-life doula conference. Doula, D-O-U-L-A, which comes from the birth doula, who kind of works with the mom before and after. And so the end-of-life doula seems to be the term. And this was a whole conference about actually integrating what is emerging as a real movement, because most of the people that attended this conference were nurses or hospice nurses, mm-hmm. wanting to expand and maybe get out of the system, so to speak.
The medical aspect of it.
But this conference was about how to integrate it into hospital and hospice settings.
Fabulous.
You know, and basically to help people turn it into a livelihood.
Right.
So it was great to see New York. I rocked the conference. Here I am, a Maui boy, wondering how I'll do in the big city, and it was great to see that I rocked it. And interesting, just to touch on New York City, I grew up there and spent my first 20 years there.
Yeah, me too.
And so now to be gone, I visited a couple of times, but I've been on Maui for 43 years. And my nervous system was way too sensitive. And not only that, I got to see how the fact that my body viscerally reacted to it. Yeah. Riding the subways and crowded subway cars in the mornings, and seeing just how desensitizing and dehumanizing the whole thing is. Yeah. And there's so much, you can't hardly see the sky. You don't know where the moon is. You don't see stars. You hardly know where the sun is. You have to go on TV to see what the weather is.
It's a very different lifestyle.
So coming back here, and there's so much green, and we're just so fortunate while there is still so much green before it gets turned into rich people's homes. So what else do I do? I go into churches, I go into Kiwanis clubs and Rotary clubs and speak, and I work with a group called Nakeki o Emilia with Brooke Brown, and I facilitate a grief group now in Baldwin High School. And these kids come voluntarily, and they've had somebody close to them die in the last whatever. Right. And so I facilitate that group.
And how can people find out more about that?
Well, you'd need to go to Baldwin High, but certainly if your kid goes to Baldwin High, find out, talk to the social worker, talk to the principal. You think it would be good for your kid. I'm sure there are more kids in that high school that are grieving the death of someone than who are coming to this group.
Sure.
There were 14 kids, and it was very beautiful, deep group. Great work.
The name of it again?
Emalia, which is the organization that trained with me, all nonprofit. We do it for free.
Right. And is there a facilitator within the school system for that?
There's the social worker, but the social worker is just trained to the degree that the social workers are trained for every issue,
right.
And death is a different issue than every issue.
Right. So the school principal would be the go-to person if a parent wanted to engage,
sure.
See if their kid could be engaged in this program.
Okay. Then that's Baldwin High. It's happening at a number of high schools and middle schools now. So if your kid goes to a different high school, middle school, you can find out from the school if they have Nakekio Emilia program, and if they don't, I would suggest you request it. Great program. And so my dad died when I was in high school, and I didn't have anywhere to go with it at all. I wish there was a group where I could have gone and met other kids that were in as much confusion and pain as I was. So that's that. Then I've been leading a monthly group called Being with Dying over in Haiku at a local church. Mm-hmm. And that's 11 years, first Monday of the month. Mm-hmm. It's coming right up, first Monday of the month, Temple of Peace, 6:30 p.m. And then I started a Death Cafe, which is something more people are aware of. It has been in the news. Basically the similar thing, a group facilitated discussion about death, and that's this first Tuesday of the month. And right now that's in Fernando's Mexican restaurant by Sears.
Oh, wow.
By what soon will be not Sears.
Well, yeah, really.
I mean, I'm doing a lot.
You are a busy boy.
I'm doing a lot, but the death store I think is such an important thing because, again, you don't see a store in the malls or at the big stores that are talking about death. It's left out of the community conversation completely, right. Where people gather, few people are talking about death, and yet it is the elephant in the room. It is ubiquitous, and we're only going to see our parents die and everyone else die unless we die first, and that looks like that's going to happen.
Well, so the death store offers essentially a quote unquote alternative process to the funeral. Most people, I don't think most people understand that embalming and our funeral process today in a funeral home is a very recent thing.
Well, embalmings, I was in a museum in New York, and those pharaohs were filled with jewels and oils. But the current embalming practice. So Doorway into Light. Let's talk about the funeral home, and we do green burials, which means we can bury people in a cardboard box in the ground. Right. Again, because so much metal and tropical hardwoods and concrete and plastic.
Well, and the formaldehyde
Formaldehyde now is the active ingredient. Formalin is a known carcinogen. Right. And we put in 1 million gallons a year, more or less, into the earth. Right. Which in Europe they've outlawed in some countries because it gets in the groundwater. We're killing ourselves. We are the terrorists. Right. What we're doing, and embalming itself is a very barbaric practice. If you watched Grandma getting embalmed, you'd never let it happen again because it's not just this cosmetic thing. It's a very barbaric. I won't get into it, but it's physically barbaric in order to make your body preserved. When in fact we have viewings of dead people that have been dead days, sometimes a week or two. They've been refrigerated the whole time, and they look absolutely beautiful and mostly normal. And embalmed bodies tend to look like somebody else, even a good job. And again, it's our avoidance and denial of the fact that Grandma died and she's not just sleeping.
Well, but I also understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the modern practice of embalming was something that was adopted in the Civil War to be able to facilitate the return of a dead soldier's body to their family back in the North. That this practice of preserving the body really became popular.
There were so many dead soldiers on the battlefield, and they were all young kids mostly, right? And in order to get them back to the family, that's when embalming came to America. That's when the funeral business came to America, because clearly mom and pop weren't going to embalm their kid.
Right.
Abraham Lincoln apparently was like the poster child. He was driven around on a train so everybody could see Abe Lincoln, and he was the first embalmed body most people had ever seen.
Right.
And then, of course, in America, if you can turn it into a lucrative money operation, there are two big corporations now that are basically eating up funeral homes. And that's even happened here in Hawaii, and it's even happened here on Maui.
So most funeral homes are no longer sort of a mom and pop operation.
I don't know about most, but many, there's still plenty mom and pop funeral homes.
Good.
And now that cremation is in the vogue, they're not raking it in like they might have been when they could add all these services to your burial.
But cremation is a lower cost alternative.
Which is why most people are choosing cremation, because it's less costly.
Right.
It's a very toxic practice and energy consuming practice, and I'm trying to educate.
Cremation.
Yeah, a lot of heavy metals, a lot of fuel.
A lot of fuel.
If you add up all the fuel, I have all that information at our store. In fact, our store is a lot about education for people to educate themselves and for people to get support.
Is cremation overall then? Is cremation?
It's a toxic practice.
It is a toxic
And people
practice.
that are concerned about what their last footprint is recognize that, gee, cremation isn't really the way to go. So what is the way to go? We're working on a model that's called the conservation burial ground.
What does that look like?
The current model, for example, you see out on Hana Highway, is acres of land taken out of the public commons forever, for one single purpose: gravestones, et cetera, right?
Right.
1 million acres of land in America gone for one single purpose, taken out of our commons. The conservation burial ground is about using a cemetery to create open space, to help protect land. And so our model...
But it's still accessible.
So the economic engine of the cemetery to fund maintaining and protecting open space. So then some of it is accessible,
right.
Some of it is kept open as greenway public space.
Right.
And what we've done with that model is to add a park, a dog park, picnic areas, farming, agriculture.
So it's not just a cemetery, it's a multi-purpose, multifunctional.
Multi-purpose community space, right? Multi-purpose for the living and the dead.
Right.
And it's a great, you know, we've been talking about this avoidance, aversion, and denial, and this is about integrating the living and the dead. And one of the reasons, and it took me a while to discover this, but one of the reasons why people choose cremation in America, not necessarily in Hawaii, but in America, people move away every 5 years on the average. They move to a different home, to a different neighborhood, to a different state, right? And so people have lost contact with either where their people are buried or the relationship of going to where your people are buried, right? I mean, we live in a state where the Hawaiians are very aware of where their people are buried.
Yeah, sure.
Very important to them. And for most Americans, we've lost the value of that relationship.
Right.
And it took me doing burials. I've been doing, most of my burials are up at the Makwa nonprofit cemetery next to the Veterans Cemetery, and sitting there and with recently buried people and walking around cemeteries, I recognize that we have lost something or robbed ourselves of the beauty of, like you said, we've lost touch with the ancestors. Yeah. And this is one of the ways to stay connected. Here we're coming up on Halloween. You know, Day of the Dead is not some superstitious thing. It's about recognizing that the ancestors are present, and in fact they need us to feed them. And and whatever food we bring to a grave is symbolic of we are feeding them, we are paying attention to them, we are saying their names, and on and on. And so many cultures recognize that the dead are not gone,
right.
And oftentimes they need our help.
Right.
We don't have a understanding of the dead in this Western Christianized culture.
And, with that Western Christianized, influence taking over the Hawaiian Islands, it has, robbed the Hawaiians of their cultural practice, of that deep understanding and respect for the bones of their ancestors. I've spoken to several Hawaiians that, realize that when they walk around Wailuku and they see concrete buildings, that, what's in that concrete is the sand that was extracted. As you leave Kahului and go up towards Wailuku, there used to be huge sand dunes there, and so much of that sand has been removed. But in that sand, as part of the removal, were the bones of their ancestors. When the Hawaiians had their wars and different conflicts.
I was invited to the burial council meeting last week in Wailuku, and they have one for every county.
Right.
And they had found bone remains at the Lahaina wastewater treatment facility. Sure. And what was odd about the meeting, and I questioned it right away, was that Hawaiian people had to prove their either literal descendancy or their cultural descendancy to those bones. And I understood why on the literal descendancy made sense, that you had to prove that was your father's father's father or whatever it was. Right. But the cultural descendancy, that was my auntie's aunt or something, I thought, well, if a Hawaiian would come down and spend hours at one of these meetings to claim cultural descendancy, why wouldn't that just be a slam dunk? Here, how would you like to handle the bones of your people? Right. Instead of all the roadblocks? Which comes back, you asked me about home burial. And I've been trying for a couple of years to get the state health department, the state planning commission, and the county planning commission on the same page in order to simplify people being able to be buried in their own backyards, which is legal in most places on Maui. But
it is.
It is in most places on Maui, but I still haven't. So, because people come to me and say, I want to have a home burial. We own the land. Right. Okay. Do you understand that if the land ever gets sold, anyone who buys it knows that your family forever can come visit your graves. And that's sometimes why people don't want to do it. It'll reduce the value of their resale. So
if you do a home burial, then that becomes a legal covenant on the deed.
That's right. That's right. And when we first started this, all we needed was to add a encumbrance to the deed. Right. And then people could. But now there's the.
So you have to be willing to accept there is perhaps a financial impact on the value of the land if someone...
More than likely, not perhaps. Very likely, I would say 99 out of 100 times it will affect the price. But I meet people that aren't planning on selling their land. They just want to give it to their kids. Right. And so I'm actually asking people now, because me as a funeral home and funeral director haven't been able to get everything lined up between the state and the county and the...
There's nuances to all of this stuff. So the family is not able to come together as a family and agree to give away that forward right of
No, I'm not talking about that.
access.
I'm just talking about... so now I've asked family members that are interested to call the state, call the county, call the Department of Health, so that we can get a streamlined process for many people that want to be buried in their backyards. As far as people agreeing to create a family burial plot, the person that owns the land and is on the deed is legally in their right to create a family burial ground on most land on Maui. As far as what happens after, that's of course with the knowledge, or they ought to have the knowledge, that it will affect, if someday the land is sold, it could at least affect the value of the land, because again, it includes, that encumbrance includes access forever to family members of that person.
And I guess that's my question, is that could not those family members release that encumbrance, release their right and give away their right?
I suppose they could.
Right. That would solve the financial.
I suppose they could.
That would be the financial solution that they would say.
I'd say when it comes to this finance and real estate, everything seems to be possible,
Right.
good and bad.
Right. It's all fascinating. It's all fascinating stuff. There are absolutely nuances to a lot of it that deal with local codes. We've got a few minutes left. What else would you like to talk about?
Well, in February, you mentioned Ram Dass and Joan Halifax and Frank Ostaseski, who started the Zen Hospice in San Francisco years ago during the AIDS epidemic. They're all coming to do an event with Ram Dass February 1st, 2nd, and 3rd at the Makwa Union Church. I'm sure you can find out about that on Ram Dass's ramdass.org. If you just Google Ram Dass February event, or Doorway into Light will be there. We'll have a table and education and information. I want everybody on Maui to know what we're doing, because our funeral home is saving people a lot of money and a lot of hoo-hoo. And our resource center in Haiku, the Death Store, I think is a very unique and important community gift and treasure that people ought to take advantage of, because we're going to die and we don't know when.
So what would people experience by going to a 3-day workshop with Ram Dass and Joan and Frank?
Well, I guess they're going to talk about what we've been talking about in terms of how to get ready to die, and how to help other people die, and recognizing that it's more than a medical and psychological event.
Right.
Because you see, that's for the most part how our culture treats dying. Medical, which means financial, and psychological. And so what is medical is viewing things falling apart, the body is falling apart. Psychological, or how we respond to things falling apart, our loss, our grieving, and etc., and the suffering we go through of, wait a minute, how can I be dying? I never got to live my life. And the angst and the existential suffering. But too, it's a spiritual event. And what that means is that we're moving from this life to what is next. And there's an in-between called dying. And that itself is a station of, hey, we're dying. And to be recognized as very beautiful and powerful times for healing and reconciliation and completion, on and on and on. Very deep stuff happens when people are aware of it and want to greet it and meet it and
participate.
And to the fact that we could all change this whole story out here, I would say, in a day, if everybody would pay attention to the fact that we're going to die and we don't know when, because then we see, well, wait a minute, the most important thing is my relationships, everything that the earth, the community of life, our friendships, our community, the land we live on, healthy people and community, and we'd stop with all this crap that's steamrolling over those very things in the sake of money and greed and power.
And that translates in many ways to people's willingness to participate in voting. That's part of why we had a desire to there's community benefit to expose the work that you do and what's available through Doorway into Light and the Death Store, but it's also an opportunity to talk about why it is so important to participate in the overall process that you're here. We're living in a robust society. We have the opportunity to participate through the vote. And that kind of awareness that we're talking about that comes through that intimacy translates directly to a willingness, for people to engage fully in their process of what's around in their lives, be present and be active and be accountable. And part of that is voting.
To me, what is amazing to me, I've been voting for 50 years, and this feels to me to be the most important election of any election I ever voted in. And we're talking about the midterms here. We're not even talking about the president.
Right.
And to me, this is so critical. I thought Stephen Colbert said it best, try to wash the lousy taste in our mouth from Trump being elected. And I told you when I came in here that I heard a report this morning that 17% of 18-year-olds in high school vote or even know that there's something to vote about, and know that there's an election coming up, and a critical one. And
only 17%.
Only 17%.
That's the word that goes in front of 17. Only 17.
And that was shocking news to me, and I thought, well, now there's the clearest indication I've heard recently of the failure of our school system itself, and nobody acknowledged that on the radio. But clearly, if we're not teaching civics in terms of what is happening and how the power thing happens and who decides what you can and cannot do, if that's not being taught in schools, then close them down. We're wasting money and time, and how unfortunate that our 18-year-olds don't know what's happening on the level of who we're going to vote for. I mean, voting still, no matter what they're trying to put out about all of it, we have the power to vote, and we got to keep using it. And of course, that comes down to every single dollar we spend is a vote. And we have to all become super conscious and aware of who we're giving that dollar to, because again, we could change the story tomorrow by how we use those dollars. Every single time we use a dollar, we vote. Yeah. Big time.
Yep.
Big
it
time.
is.
I mean, so much to me, the death thing, we're watching the world dying. We are watching the world dying. And many of us are grieving and don't know what to do about it, and and we're part of it. If you have a computer and a car and a phone, you're part of what's making the whole thing go. And we're grieving that we're part of it, and yet we're witnessing this thing. But meanwhile, there's a puppet show going on, and Rome is burning, and somebody's playing the violin. And so in a sense, some of my work is about, hey, look, folks, the world may be dying, and we may be witnessing the end of the world in terms of the earth itself, and it'll survive, and maybe humans need to go. But clearly everybody's waiting for, I think everybody's collectively holding their breath into what's next. So
in preparation, I mean, just segueing back to the program that'll be happening on Maui in February, if people want to get a taste of that, that's the work that will go on in February is very similar to the work that we've done before and have had the opportunity to film and package into the Dying into Love program. That's an online program that you can go to dyingintolove.com. And people can access video content that is very educational.
When Ramdas and I brought Joan Halifax and Dale Borglum, and we had a number of events here.
We had three events that you and I did, and there's hours and hours of video that has been packaged. It's a very instructional for family members who are attending to their loved ones who are dying. And there are even people that were in the workshop who were actively dying themselves. There were several people there that were engaged in that were living with cancer, but deteriorating, and their children with them in the workshop. Fascinating to hear, directly the direct experience of that relationship change between, a parent, a child who is now attending their dying parent, and how that role reversal, was so emotionally charged and so valuable to both of their own, personal being.
Well, you see how dying isn't just about yourself, that your dying can affect the younger generation witnessing or participating in your dying, and that in turn will affect their children and their children. So your dying isn't just about you. In fact, I'll ask that same group of people, how many of you were affected at one time when somebody close to you died? And most everybody was affected by it, and in some way was changed by it. The clearest example that you're dying is not just for yourself. So I wanted to say, if you want to know more about Doorway into Light, we have a great website. Our April event will fill up, and I'd love more Maui people to attend our 5-day.
People come from all over the world.
Ramdas will be there, Leohu Ryder will be there, and I bring in some other presenters from the mainland, and it's a powerful event. So if you think one day you might be caring for someone who's dying, or want to be more educated about your own eventual dying, or you're just curious, or you work in these fields, nurses and doctors, etc., come. I invite you to go check out our website, doorwayintolight.org, and see what we're up to. And or connect with me. You can email me if you have more questions.
How at?
info@Doorway.org.
And the death store?
Death store, again, open Saturdays from 10 to 2, and by appointment on West Quiaha Road in the old Pawella Cannery. Baked on Maui's there, hardware store. I'd love you to come by and see what we're doing. I think it's a very revolutionary and important part of, and there ought to be one, I say there ought to be one next to every Starbucks in America. We need to just not accept that we're going to die. We certainly don't need to be in denial. It's not serving us. Let's fall in love with the fact that everything's going to die. I mean, that is the deepest teaching, I think, how much we will care for life itself and care for ourselves and care for each other in the light of it.
All tribal cultures, you know, as people were living in villages, there's ceremonies.
You saw it all the time.
All the time.
Even now today in Bali, the businesses will close down and they'll parade a body through the street, and people stop and honor and pray, and it's a community thing. It's just another thing that happens in village life.
Right.
Right. I want to help that happen. I want to bring that back to America.
Bring that back. To be able to have, you know, comfortable rituals around death, and rather than
home
it being
funerals, have people participate in the care of a dead body before it goes off to be buried, on and on. It's so powerful to be connected to. A friend of mine, his mom just died. Well, keep her home. You know, stay with her, pray with her, keep a candle lit.
How long can someone keep
in Hawaii, you're supposed to be refrigerated, cremated, or buried in 30 hours. Some people claim their religious rights to keep a body home for 2 or 3 days, and we'll help them keep it cold and, you know, keep it in good condition. But you know,
to have time.
To have time.
Too often, the richness.
Too often we want the body immediately taken away. The next time we see the body, it's either embalmed or it's ashes. Now there's been a break in our ability to be part of it, and that has affected our ability to grieve.
Yeah.
It breaks into our grieving.
Well, and I can tell you from personal experience that, you know, it was a phenomenal process to be able to witness and facilitate my own mother's passing.
I love how you described it.
Thank you. Thank you, Bodhi, and thank you all for participating in our show. I'm Sam Small, and join us again on Maui Causes. This program is brought to you as a public service by Maui Causes. Maui Causes is a crowd-funded media production group that provides media production services to a variety of environmental and progressive causes here in Maui County. Visit us on the web at www.mauicauses.org.